I'm going to make some delicious brandy balls. You can use bourbon or any kind of whiskey as well. I just recently did a video on vanilla wafer bourbon balls, and I used brandy. And that was the classic bourbon ball in the 60s that people made, and that was the type that my mom made when we were kids growing up, the kind we snuck into. But this particular recipe that I'm going to make is a different version of a really delicious chocolatey bourbon ball. I created my own dipping chocolate. It's a different version than what's out there, but it's really delicious. So the classic version that I showed you with the vanilla wafers is a classic and traditional bourbon ball or brandy ball, but this one is much more delicious. So I think you're really going to like this recipe. It is unbelievably delicious. It's completely different from the classic one, totally different ingredients. So I hope you'll enjoy this recipe. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a pound of powdered sugar in a bowl. We're going to melt 1 stick of butter, and then we have 1 cup of pecans that I chopped yesterday and soaked this overnight, and a half a cup of brandy. This recipe is also good for any kind of whiskey or bourbon, whatever you like. So right now we're going to melt the butter. This will go very quickly because it's a very simple recipe. So after we have the powdered sugar, we're going to add our nuts in that we soaked all night in brandy or bourbon. We're going to pour that all in here. They're still very liquidy. They've absorbed a lot of the liquid, but they're still wet. The nuts are wet from all that alcohol. And then we're going to pour in our melted stick of butter. And everything goes in this bowl. And now we're going to stir everything together. And you can smell the wonderful brandy aroma. So we're mixing this all together. And now we're going to refrigerate it until this firms up. And then we're going to roll them in balls. And then I'll show you our dipping chocolate that we're going to use. We're not using paraffin. I know there's recipes out there that use the wax, the paraffin, and that's fine, but I'm not going to in my recipe. So this is exactly how it's going to be, and we're going to refrigerate that an hour at least. We're in colder weather, so hopefully with the colder weather and the refrigerator, it should be an hour or 2 to harden this up. So part of my recipe is I get half pieces of pecans, and I roast them in the oven on 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I roast them for 10 minutes because they have a lot more flavor. So that's what I do. And our batter took about an hour to get hard like this, where we could work with it. So now what we're going to do, while we're baking our pecans, I roast them because they have a lot more flavor, is we're going to get like little balls, like maybe the size of a walnut, and we're going to roll them up, and they're nice and firm. So we're going to put them on some wax paper, and this is very easy to work with. It's much easier to work with than the vanilla wafer ones. And like I said, those are the classic ones that I grew up with, and these are kind of a more advanced, progressive one, and they're much more flavorful. Instead of vanilla wafers as their base is the powdered sugar. And of course, what's really neat is that these pecans soaked for 24 hours. So the chocolate dip that I'm going to melt these in is completely different from what you see. I've added my own little creation to them, and I think you're going to really love them. So I'm going to finish rolling these, and I'll be back. Okay, I just took the pecans out of the oven. They roasted for about 10 minutes. And I just finished rolling the bourbon balls, And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the chocolate that we're going to dip it in, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So what makes my coating very unique is, first of all, I don't use paraffin. I use 6 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate chips, and I use 6 ounces of butterscotch chips. And then I get a double boiler or a pot, and I'm going to melt these chips on a double boiler. And if you don't have a double boiler, that's okay. You just use a pot of water, and you put like a bowl on the top of it, and you just melt your chips that way. You don't have to have a double boiler. I just happen to have one. So we're going to melt these, and then we're going to dip the balls in them and let them set in the refrigerator. Okay, our chocolate and butterscotch chips are melted, and we just took it off the stove. And now the next part, the last part, is you're going to take your bourbon balls and you're going to dip them in the chocolate, just like this. You're going to coat them. And like I said, you don't need paraffin. You're just going to take them just like this. You might want to use 2 spoons like this. And you're going to place them on your cookie sheet with parchment paper. And what you're going to do immediately after coating it is you're going to take one of these roasted pecans that you roasted, and you're just going to smash it right on top. That's what we're going to do. And the way you can get by not using paraffin is, as soon as we're done with this process, dipping all these and coating them in your chocolate sauce, as soon as we're done putting all these on here, we're going to put them in the refrigerator and let them set. And so that way you avoid having to use paraffin, and it works. So I'm going to just finish these up. Okay, here they are. They turned out delicious. If you want to use paraffin, you can. It will give it a shinier chic, and it's easier to work with. And you would use 1 ounce of paraffin. I don't want to use paraffin because it's just, I like to use as less additions as possible. But for people that want really prettier, shinier ones, you definitely would want to use 1 ounce of it. I just don't use it. So let's give it a try. These are what they look like. You can see. Really, really delicious. These were put in the freezer for like 10 minutes to set, and they set immediately. You can put them in the refrigerator, but if you put them in the freezer, it's much quicker. These, I must say, are superior to the old-fashioned classic bourbon balls. There is no comparison. These are richer, creamier. They have melted butter and then the powdered sugar. It's all very rich and much better. It's really good. I think you should try this recipe. I think you'll love it. Thank you.